Hello everybody, my name is Garry. Welcome to episode 6 on my channel. In this episode I'm going to talk you through a refight I did of one of the scenarios in my new book, Wellington at Bay, Battle for Villamuriel, 25th of October 1812. This game was begun on the 208th anniversary of the battle, and I just want to take you through it as it played out. Scenario 1 is slightly different to the previous videos, which have all focused on Wellington's counterattack. Scenario 3. In Scenario 1 we deal with what happened first thing in the morning when the French arrived on the battlefield. I've left the introductory slides the same as in the previous videos, so if you've seen those you may want to fast forward past the campaign background and the orders of battle and the way the battlefield was put together. Thanks very much. This slide shows the campaign map with the British having retired from Burgos through Torquemada, where both armies took a lot of pleasure from the local wine, through to Magas, and then the British themselves formed a line on the Carrion from Palencia in the north, through Villamuriel de Crato to Duenas on the Puisega. The French, by the evening of the 24th of October, had got as far as Magas in the centre of the map. And the following morning, on the 25th, Macoun, who was in charge of both his divisions and Gauthier's division, was sent as the advance guard. He himself went to Villamuriel de Crato via Calabazanos, while Gautier attacked the bridge at Tariego. This is the battlefield that we'll be seeing in 15mm scale in a few moments, and there are several points of interest. The village itself features a quite substantial church, but other than that at the time had only about 100 houses. It was on the main carriage road from Palencia to Duenas, and the other main habitation was the monastery at Calabazanos. In terms of crossing the river, that was only possible at the two fords marked here and the bridge. The weather had been quite bad in the preceding week with a lot of rain, so the river was running fast and deep. The other big feature of the battlefield, second only to the river, is the dry Canal de Castilla, which was under construction when the war broke out, and so consequently was unfinished and was empty. It's a significant feature such that men standing in the bottom of the canal can't see out, so it's quite an obstacle. Another feature of the battlefield were these wine vaults or bodegas, which created some rough ground on the western side of the canal. These vaults were quite extensive excavations. Some are reported to have had 100 steps underground, and basically they provided rough ground for skirmishers to defend. And the other feature of significance on the battlefield was the high ground. It rose from about 715 meters by the river up to 800 meters. Orders of battle for the day. The Allied force constituted the 5th Anglo-Portuguese division, and they were under some new commanders. So Major General John Oswald arrived that morning to take command. Edward Barnes wasn't officially in command of the brigade for another 2 days, but had arrived just in time to take part in the battle. The division was supported by a brigade of the Galician Army of Spain, the 6th Army. So all told, they had 5,500 men with 6 guns. The French were comprised of the 5th Division of the Army of Portugal, led by General Division Macoun. This was the division beaten by the 5th Anglo-Portuguese Division at Salamanca just a few months earlier. The division comprised 2 brigades, each of 2 regiments, each of 2 battalions, and they also had 5 foot guns in support. Also supporting the division were the Light Cavalry Brigade of Defos, which comprised 6 squadrons of light cavalry plus a small detachment of a further regiment. This brigade was actually Curto's brigade, who was currently away commanding the division. The whole force was supported by Suham's 1st Reserve Horse Artillery Company and with 5 guns. So in total, the French had just under 6,000 men and 10 guns. Okay, so as regards to game rules, I'm using Black Powder 2nd edition, but I have always used 15mm figures, and therefore I use the centimetre scale where all distances in the rules are measured in centimetres rather than inches. I also always use the special rule that was introduced in Last Argument of Kings and is now adopted in Clash of Eagles from the Napoleonic period, wherein you can't fire if the unit has moved more than once in a turn. In Black Powder 2 there are several versions of divisional generals that you can use, and although it's not my favourite, I chose to use the divisional generals giving rerolls as an option this time round. I've used the staff ratings in order to reflect the way the generals behaved on the day. So the best example of this is Spry, whose brigade was left in the canal or thereabouts throughout the day and really didn't take part in the action. So he has a very low staff rating to make it hard for him to be moved. Another special feature of the game is that the wine harvest had just been brought in to the village and to the wine cellars, and so neither side wanted to allow their troops into the buildings in the village, in either of the villages, so they can't be garrisoned under the rules I'm using for the game. Finally, I use skirmishes slightly different from the way they're represented in the rulebook in order to better reflect their dispersion and usual organisation. Differently. This shows how I represent skirmishes. I use these 6 centimetre movement trays which show the correct frontage and depth for a deployed skirmish company. So a French company of 4 figures or 130 men in this would have 2 of these bases. And I also give skirmishers light cover if they've moved less than 6 centimetres to represent the effect of the greater dispersion than is allowed for in the rules. So this scenario lasts about 3 hours or 12 game turns from 9 AM, and the French move first. The victory conditions for both sides are fairly straightforward. For the French, they must get 1 or more of their 2 brigades across the river with more than half their units intact, and that will give them the victory. And for the Allies, they have a simple task of just preventing the French fulfilling their own victory conditions in order to win. A special feature of this scenario involves the destruction of the bridge at Villamuriel. What Wellington hoped to do is protect his line behind the Carrion and the Pusega rivers by destroying the bridges at Palencia, at Villamuriel and at Tariego near Duenas. And the idea was that engineers were sent overnight previously to prepare the bridges for demolition. So at Villamuriel we needed a mechanism in order to reflect this process. And the way I chose to do it is with a simple die roll. To initiate the detonation of the mine, the British player rolls a d6. The score on the die will determine when exactly the detonation of the mine would take place. 4 plus, 4, 5 or 6, it will take place immediately. On a score of 2 or 3, it takes place at the beginning of the subsequent move, and on a score of 1, poorest result, it would take place the move after next. And this gives some tension into the whole process and reflects the last minute nature of the preparation for the bridge, about which the bridge's demolition, about which Wellington was very nervous, as reported by several eyewitnesses. So once the detonation has been initiated, the British and Allied player throws another d6, and on a score of 1, the mine is deemed to have failed and the bridge remains intact, and there is only one attempt allowed in this regard. So overall, the destruction of the bridge can be varied in terms of both timing, when it happens, and also whether it happened at all, which reflects the uncertainties around this activity during the Peninsular War. So finally, if the attempt to detonate the mine is successful, the bridge is destroyed, and any unit on the bridge at the time of the explosion is either broken in black powder or dispersed in general de brigade and removed from play. So this photograph shows the deployment of the troops on the table at the beginning of the game. You can see in the top left-hand part of the photograph the arriving French division under McCune, and manning the defences in the village and along the river is the Anglo-Portuguese and Spanish troops. This photograph shows the French troops in close-up. Highlighted here are Darmo's 1st Brigade of the 15th Ligne and the 66th Ligne, the 15th on the left as we look at them, with their separated out voltigeurs and grenadiers forming the central columns. And this highlights Montfort's brigade of the 82nd and 86th Ligne, following along in the same sort of order. Along the road are the divisional artillery assets led by Blanzat, and the horse artillery from the Army Reserve is taking the lead, obviously followed by McCoon's own foot battery unit. And this final base is McCoon with his staff officers, his chief of staff and ADC and his engineering officer. At the bridge itself, awaiting the French, were just the combined light companies of the 5th Anglo-Portuguese Division. So to the right of the bridge, as we looked at it, were the skirmishers of, or the light companies of Barnes's brigade, including Sergeant or then Corporal James Hale. While across the river were the light companies of Pringle's own brigade, which also included, as did Barnes's brigade, a company of the Brunswick Earls Light Infantry. On a mound just outside the village was Lawson's company, brigade rather, of the Royal Artillery, where they had a good view and could cover the bridge with ease. Also waiting covered by the same mound was the 1st 9th Foot Hale's parent battalion, in column, ready to pounce on any French that ventured across the bridge. Meanwhile, in the village street, also covered by the buildings, was the 2nd Battalion of the 4th Foot, also in column, waiting to attack any French that crossed the river. Behind the village, in the dry canal bed, were the rest of Pringle's Brigade, the 1st Battalion 4th Foot and the 2nd Battalions of the 30th Foot and the 44th Foot. They were there, sheltered from any French artillery fire. Also in the canal were Barnes's other 2 battalions, the 1st and 2nd Battalion of the 38th Foot, who were also sheltering in the canal. The other battalion I haven't mentioned, the 3rd 1st Foot, had been sent to Palencia to cover the destruction of the bridges there. Behind all of those units, up on the hills, were on the extreme Allied left, was the Brigade of Lignan, with its 2 battalions of relatively newly raised Spanish infantry. On the other flank, in amongst the woods near the ford at Calabazanos, were the Cazadores commanded by Major Dudley Hill, the Cazadores number 8. They were accompanied by 1 company of the 9th Foot also. As I mentioned earlier, behind them in the canal, dry canal bed, were the rest of Spry's brigade, the 3rd Regiment and the 15th Regiment Line Infantry, 2 battalions each. So, having provided all of the background and the setup, we're now going to go through each turn and show a few photographs of the situation in the game as it happened, starting with the end of French turn 1. And as you can see here, the French horse battery has been deployed forward, ready to bombard the British positions around the bridge. The other less successful move for the French was to deploy some of Darnold's voltigeurs and grenadiers as skirmishers towards the ford at Calabazanos to occupy the Portuguese light infantry there. Unfortunately, the other set of skirmishers, unit of skirmishers, were supposed to have gone forward in support of the horse artillery, but failed their command test and also failed the re-roll, so they stayed where they were. So this created a favourable situation for the Allies, and at the end of their first turn, the fire from the skirmishers and the Mawson's artillery had managed to disorder and shake the horse artillery battery. By the end of the French second turn, they'd started to correct some of the problems in their first turn, and they brought forward more of their artillery to support the horse artillery, and also brought forward some skirmishers to try and deal with the British skirmishers from Pringle's brigade. Meanwhile, the rest of Darnold's skirmishers were making much slower progress, advancing towards the ford in order to deploy against the Cazadores. So, with the French advancing on the bridge, Pringle decided that it was time to withdraw his skirmishers across the bridge in order to allow for the bridge to be demolished. So, using the protocol I described beforehand, Pringle and Oswald initiated the demolition of the bridge, and they were lucky they got it to be demolished in this move, and that was all good news. Unfortunately, they threw a 1 when it came to actually setting the mine off, so it didn't explode. It was a dud, and the bridge couldn't be demolished. This is not unusual. As I said, on this day, Wellington tried to destroy the bridges at 3 places. The bridge at Palencia were captured intact because the engineer hadn't enough time to complete preparations before the French arrived. At Tariego, the mine was exploded, but the destruction was not enough to prevent the French cavalry rushing across the bridge and capturing the party there required to guard and demolish the bridge intact. So it's not unusual. Obviously, it was only a 1 in 6 chance, and obviously dramatically changes the nature of this scenario. So moving forward to the end of French turn 3, the skirmishers that had been deployed to support the artillery had failed to move any further forward, so that was a bit of a delay in things. However, by now all of the French guns are deployed and are bombarding the artillery that on the mound next to the village, and have caused the casualties straight away. Meanwhile, the French have finally managed to deploy their skirmishers close to the ford at Calabazanos, and started to engage the Portuguese and English infantry there. So at the end of Allied turn 3, the only change really was a reaction to the bridge not having been demolished, which involved Pringle's skirmishers preparing to advance across the bridge and take up their initial positions again. However, by the end of French turn 4, they'd got their skirmishers from the 15th Ligne forward to take those positions and prevent the British deploying any further. Also on French turn 4, they managed to complete the deployment of their skirmishers by the ford at Calabazanos and engage with the Portuguese and British light infantry there. Meanwhile, the French artillery continued to bombard Lawson and his guns on the mound. We're now at the end of Allied turn 4, during which Pringle withdrew his skirmishers back across the bridge again to take up their previous positions. Meanwhile, at the mill at Calabazanos near the ford, the ongoing duel with the light infantry on both sides continued, the French having ended up with 2 casualties on the 2 units there. So here we are at the end of French turn 5, and the French skirmishers near the bridge have closed in on the riverbank to engage the British and Brunswick skirmishers there. Meanwhile, on the French left, the skirmishing continues, and this time the French have managed to shake the leading wing of the Caçadores. This photograph shows the situation at the end of Allied turn 5, and first thing to bear in mind is continuing failure on the French part in terms of getting forward the close order infantry to support the skirmishers at the bridge. Meanwhile, on Allied turn 5, the British and Brunswick skirmishers have scored an early victory against the French skirmishers, disordering them in the process. Meanwhile, also at the end of Allied turn 5, Hill has managed to rally his leading wing of the Caçadores, so they could continue the long skirmish with their French opposite numbers. Moving forward now to the end of French turn 6, and during this turn the French skirmishers have been more successful, disordering both of the British light company battalions. Meanwhile, McEwen has been successful in bringing forward the columns of the infantry of the 1st Brigade, the 15th and the 60th Linear. Meanwhile, at the ford, the skirmishing continues between the respective light infantry companies. We're now at the end of Allied turn 6. During this time, the skirmishing on the bridge has disordered the French light troops. And meanwhile, on at the ford, the skirmishing there continues between both sets of light troops. This may seem boring, but on the day, it carried on for the best part of 4 hours. Now we're at the end of French turn 7, with the skirmishing at the bridge continuing between the respective light troops. Meanwhile, the brigade of columns, close order columns, have hardly moved, but they've got a bit closer to the bridge, not ready to attack yet, obviously. And once more, the skirmishing at Calabazzanos continues. So, we are now at the end of Allied turn 7, and the skirmishing at the bridge continuing. Obviously, as it stands, the Allies are winning the game, even though the bridge has not been destroyed. At Calabazzanos, the skirmishing continues. Moving forward to the end of game turn 8 for the French, their skirmishers at the bridge have had some success, scoring casualties on both Pringles and Barnes's light companies, shaking the latter. Meanwhile, McEwen and Darno completely failed to get their charge across the bridge or executed from behind the woods. However, the French artillery managed to disorder one half of Lawson's brigade. Also on French turn 8, Montfort starts the slow process of moving his infantry from the 2nd Brigade forward to support the upcoming assault by 1st Brigade. And again, the skirmishing continues at the ford. So here we are at the end of Allied turn 8. And the first thing to say here is that by about this time, Wellington had been informed that the French were across the river Carrion at Palencia, a few miles to the north. And as a reaction to this, he decided to detach some troops from Villamuriel to help the defenders there. And he sent the Oswald, the division commander, away with Barnes and his brigade. And so here we see the 1st Battalion 38, 2nd Battalion 38 having left the field. On the day, the 2nd 4th Foot from Pringle's brigade also went with Barnes and Oswald. However, that was in the context of the bridge having been destroyed. I decided for the purposes of this scenario to keep the 2nd 4th at Villamuriel. Meanwhile, during Allied turn 8, despite the losses, the British and Brunswick skirmishers at the bridge managed to score some losses and some disorder amongst the French skirmishers on the other bank. Meanwhile, at the ford, the skirmishing continued. This time, Caçadores causing disorder amongst the their French opponents. So here we are at the end of French turn 9. During this turn, at last, the French organised an assault on the bridge. The 1st Battalion, the 15th Linear, charging across the bridge, supported by the rest of their brigade. Meanwhile, the 4th Battalion of the 66th Linear advanced the river bank, looking for the fords that crossed the river close to the bridge. In response to the French charge, Pringle's skirmishers evaded back towards the canal. Also on French turn 9, the French artillery scored another hit and shook one half of Lawson's Royal Artillery. Meanwhile, at the ford at Calabazzanos, the skirmishing continued. So we're now at the end of Allied Turn 9, and the 1st Battalion 9th Foot have moved forward, deployed into line, ready to repel the French invaders. At the bridge, the skirmishers of Barnes's brigade, also on Allied Turn 9, managed to disorder the 4th Battalion 66th, making it more difficult for them to move forward next move. Moving forward to French Turn 10, significant turn. The 1st 15th Ligne have charged the 1st 9th. It's only a small unit. Its closing fire wasn't enough to stop the oncoming column, and which was a large column, a large unit. And despite receiving casualties, the French won the close combat, pushing the 1st 9th back to the canal with a subsequent round of melee to be fought. Meanwhile, the French skirmishers have crossed the river, following on from the attack of the 1st 15th, and they've scored some casualties, some disorder on the Allied skirmishers. And following on from the attack of the 1st 15th, the 2nd 15th Ligne crosses the bridge to provide close support. Meanwhile, at Calabazarnas, the skirmishing continues. So moving forward to the end of Allied Turn 10, the 1st 9th lost their melee close combat with the 1st 15th, who were then able, as a victorious unit, despite having 3 casualties, not shaken yet, to form line to their flank facing the artillery. Also in Allied Turn 10, the Allied skirmishers were again causing disorder amongst their French counterparts at the bridge. Meanwhile, at the ford, the skirmishing continued. So we're now at the end of French Turn 11, and during this turn, the 1st 15th Ligne were able to charge one half of Lawson's artillery brigade and destroy it in the close combat. Obviously couldn't charge the second half because they weren't allowed a sweeping advance. Meanwhile, the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Ligne, supported by the 2 battalions of the 66th Ligne, crashed into the 2nd 4th Foot, which had just emerged from the village, and despite winning the melee, the 2nd 4th Foot held their ground, and the close combat continued into the Allied turn. At the ford, the skirmishing continued, inconclusively. We're now at the end of Allied Turn 11, and the fight between the 2nd 4th Foot and the 2nd 15th Ligne has continued. Again, the British infantry lost, but managed to hold their ground. Meanwhile, the rest of Lawson's brigade escaped across the canal via the bridge. During this turn also, Pringle moved his other 2 battalions out of the canal to guard the bridge and cover the withdrawal of the rest of the British. Lenian also moved his infantry forward towards the canal to contest any crossing there. And at Calabazarnas in Allied Turn 11, the skirmishing continued inconclusively. Right, we're now at the end of French Turn 12, the end of the scenario for them, and the close combat between the 2nd 15th and the 2nd 4th Foot has continued, the French winning again and pushing the British back and following up. Both units are now shaken. Diarmid in the centre has paused to rally the 1st 15th Foot, reducing their casualties now to 2. Meanwhile, skirmishers of the 15th Ligne are protecting the bridgehead from the Allied skirmishers and causing more disorder amongst them. And at the ford of Calabazanos, the skirmishing continues to sputter on inconclusively. Right, we're now at the end of Allied turn 12, the end of the scenario, and the 2nd, 4th foot have managed to hold their own in the final close combat against the 2nd, 15. Both sides disordered. The combat ended in a draw. The Allied skirmishers at the same time are pressing against the French equivalents, but obviously to no good effect. Meanwhile, at Calabazanos, another last-minute mini victory for the Cazadores as they score more disorder amongst the French skirmishers facing them. So this shot is the final shot showing the game as it ended at the end of Allied turn 12, and we'll now go on to look at the victory condition. So the victory conditions for the French were to get one or more of their brigades across the river with more than half its units, and the Allied victory condition was to stop them doing that. So yes, the French had managed to get the 1st Brigade across the river, and with the 2nd Brigade following closely behind. And no, the Allies hadn't prevented the French completing their victory conditions, although the failure of the bridge to explode would have had a key role to play in that. So this game ends clearly in a French win. So that's the end of this film. I'd just like to remind you that if you want to know more about the Battle of Villamuriel, then you could look out for my book Wellington at Bay, which is published by Hellion, and that's readily available, and I hope you feel the need now, having my whetted your appetite, to get out there and buy it. I will be making further videos like this, another replay of this particular scenario, where hopefully the bridge is destroyed next time, and also scenario 2, which is the major French attack in the afternoon. So look out for those, and for further videos on my channel, but most of all look out for my book. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much.